didn't cry when they said it. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't even look up from the program in my hands. My convocation was held at the University of Guelph, in a hall that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and someone's too strong perfume. I just walked across the stage to receive a degree in accounting. 4 years of 6 a.m. study sessions, 2 part-time jobs, $17,000 in student loans that I had taken on entirely by myself. I was 22 years old, and I had done every single bit of it alone. My parents were sitting 3 rows back. I had spotted them before the ceremony started. My mother in a yellow cardigan I didn't recognize, my father with his arms crossed even then, even before anything had happened. And beside them, my sister, tall, effortlessly pretty, a year older than me and already in her second year of a master's program at McGill. After the ceremony, we went to a restaurant on Stone Road. My parents chose it. It was the kind of place with laminated menus and a salad bar, not the kind of place you go to celebrate, but I didn't say anything about that either. We sat in a booth, my father ordered the chicken. My mother asked my sister how her thesis was coming along. They talked about her supervisor, her research, the conference she might be presenting at in the spring. I ate my soup and listened. Then, at some point, I don't even remember how it came up, my father looked at me across the table and said, "You know your sister was accepted into that program with a 91 average. You really should have pushed yourself harder." I was holding my spoon. I set it down carefully. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. My sister looked at her plate. My mother said, "We're just saying, sweetheart. You have potential. You just don't always use it." I had graduated with a 3.8 GPA. I had won a departmental award I hadn't told them about because I already knew it wouldn't matter. I paid for my own meal with my debit card. I hugged them goodbye in the parking lot. I drove back to my apartment in Kitchener, sat on my bed and started calculating, almost automatically, the way my brain works, always in numbers. How long I could survive on what I had in my checking account if everything went wrong at once. 11 weeks, if I was careful. 11 weeks, if I was careful. 11 weeks. I thought about that number for a while, and then I opened my laptop and started applying for jobs. I should explain a few things about my family, because otherwise, none of what comes later makes sense. My parents immigrated from the UK to Southern Ontario in the early 90s. My father worked in insurance adjusting for most of my childhood. My mother did bookkeeping part-time from home. They were not extravagant people. We were comfortable in the modest sense. Owned our house in Cambridge, took 1 vacation a year, always had food. There was nothing dramatic about our poverty or our wealth. What was dramatic was the way my parents organized their love. My sister was 3 years old when I was born, and from what I can piece together, from photos, from things relatives have let slip at Christmas dinners, she was already established as the one. The smart one. The one with the future. By the time I was old enough to understand anything, it was simply a fact of our household. As fixed as the furniture. My sister was exceptional, and I was fine. My sister got a tutor when she struggled with math in grade 7. I failed a science test in grade 8, and my father told me to figure it out. She got a laptop for her 16th birthday, a brand new MacBook. I got a $40 gift card to Chapters. She was driven to her extracurriculars. I took the bus. None of this was said out loud. None of it was ever called what it was. It just was. When I got accepted to Guelph, my mother said, "That's nice, honey." When my sister got into McGill the following year, my parents drove to Cambridge from wherever they'd been visiting and took her out for dinner at a steakhouse. I know this because my sister texted me about it awkwardly, like she wasn't sure whether I'd find it funny or not. I found it clarifying. I stopped expecting things after that. I stopped calling home as much. I started building the kind of life where I didn't need anyone to show up for me, because I had stopped waiting for it. I paid my own tuition. I worked weekends at a tax preparation office through my 2nd and 3rd year. I bought my own groceries, did my own laundry in a coin machine in the basement of my building, tracked every dollar I spent in a spreadsheet I updated every Sunday night. I got good at it. Not just surviving, I got actually good at money. By the time I graduated, I had $6,200 in a TFSA and 0 credit card debt. My student loans were on a repayment schedule I had negotiated with NSLSC before I even had a job lined up. My parents thought I was fine. They thought I was just fine. I moved to Hamilton after I got hired at a mid-size accounting firm downtown. It was a good job. Real salary, benefits, a pension plan, the kind of thing I used to map out in imaginary spreadsheets when I was 19 and scared. I found a one-bedroom apartment near Lock Street. I adopted a cat named Revenue, which my coworkers found funnier than my family ever would have. I made friends slowly. I started running along the waterfront trail on Saturday mornings. I built something. I didn't call home often, but I didn't disappear either. Christmas, birthdays, the occasional Sunday dinner, when I happened to be passing through Cambridge. I kept it civil. I kept it at a distance. I told myself this was healthy. My sister had finished her master's and taken a research position at a lab in Montreal. We texted occasionally, more than we had growing up actually. She was not a bad person. She had not chosen to be the favorite, any more than I had chosen not to be. There was something between us that had never quite been spoken. A kind of mutual awareness of how we had been positioned against each other, and sometimes I thought maybe we could have been close if things had been different. We just never quite got there. Then, 26 months after I moved to Hamilton, I got a phone call from my mother on a Tuesday evening. "We need to talk to you about something," she said. "It's serious." I was standing in my kitchen. I had a pot of pasta on the stove. I turned the burner down. "Your father and I are in a bit of a difficult position," she said. "With the house." I waited. "We've had some financial trouble. The mortgage payments, we've been behind. And there are some other debts." I asked her to tell me the amount. She hesitated. I asked again. 43,000, she said. Combined. I sat down. She kept talking. Something about a home equity line of credit they had maxed out. Something about unexpected expenses. Something about how they had tried to manage it, but it had gotten away from them. She used the phrase, "beyond our control," twice. She did not, at this point, say what the money had actually gone toward. "We were hoping," she said, "that you might be able to help. You've always been so responsible with money." What I wanted to say, "You said I never pushed myself hard enough." What I said, "I need to think about it." I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. Revenue jumped onto the counter and bumped his head against my arm. The pasta went soft in the pot. I opened my laptop and stared at my savings account and thought about the fact that I built everything I had from nothing with no help, and that the people who had given me nothing were now calling it responsible. I called my mother back 3 days later and told her I would help, but that I needed more information first. She said, "Of course, anything. We're so grateful." I asked her to walk me through the debts in detail. She did, reluctantly, in the way someone does when they're hoping you'll stop asking, before you get to the part that matters. There was the HELOC $24,000. There was a line of credit in my father's name, $11,000. There were some credit card balances. She said a few thousand, which I noted and did not challenge yet. Then I asked what the money had been spent on. Long pause. "Your father had a bit of a problem," she said. "With gambling. Online. He's been getting help. He's doing much better now." I wrote it down. I kept my voice very flat. "How long?" "A few years," she said. "We didn't want to worry you." I thanked her for telling me. I said I would think about it and be in touch. Then I called my sister. She picked up on the second ring. I hadn't called her, just called without texting first, in probably 2 years. She sounded surprised. I said, "Did you know?" And she said, very quietly, "Not all of it, some of it." We talked for almost 2 hours. It was the longest conversation we had ever had as adults. She told me she had known about the gambling for about 8 months. Our parents had told her in a way that was framed as a family update, matter of fact, and had then asked her for money too. She had given them $4,000 from her savings. She was on a research salary. It was real money to her, and they had told her it would cover the main debt. She had not known about the HELOC. She had not known about the line of credit. She had not known about the line of credit. She had not known, she said, that they were going to call me too. "I think they've been working through everyone," she said. "I don't think they have a plan." I asked her if she knew the full picture. All of it, every account. She didn't. I said, "I want to put it together. Will you help me?" She said yes. Over the next 3 weeks, my sister and I did something we had never done before. We worked as a team. She had access to some paperwork they had sent her when they initially asked for money. I requested the rest through my parents, framing it as due diligence, telling them I needed to understand the full situation before I could commit to anything. My father bristled. My mother smoothed it over. They sent what I asked for, mostly. I built a spreadsheet. Of course I did. What emerged was not pretty. The gambling losses went back further than 3 years, closer to 6. The HELOC had been taken against the Cambridge house, which they had owned outright as of 2019. They had borrowed against it in increments, each time telling the bank it was for home renovations. The line of credit had been opened in my father's name alone, but there was a second one, smaller, $6,000, that they had opened in my mother's name around the same time. Total debt load, just over $48,000, not 43. They had rounded down. The house itself was still in positive equity, not by a lot, but enough that they weren't underwater. But the monthly carrying costs of all this debt, combined with their regular expenses and my father's pension, which had already started, he was 63, were running them close to the line every month. One unexpected expense and they'd be in serious trouble. My sister looked at the spreadsheet when I sent it to her and called me immediately. They told me it was under control, she said. I know. They told me my $4,000 covered the worst of it. I know. I let that sit. I feel like an idiot, she said. I told her she wasn't. I told her they had done it deliberately, presented just enough of the truth to get what they wanted without giving anyone the full picture so that no one person would know how bad it actually was. It was almost sophisticated, in a grim way. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do we do?" I have been thinking about this. Here is what I did not do. I did not send money. Not $1. Here is what I did instead. I called a credit counselor at a nonprofit agency in Cambridge, one of the actual legitimate ones, not a for-profit debt settlement company, and I explained the situation as a hypothetical. The counselor walked me through the options. There was a debt management plan, where a counselor negotiates with creditors and the person pays one consolidated monthly payment. There was a consumer proposal, a formal legal process under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, where a trustee negotiates to pay back a percentage of the debt over up to 5 years. And there was bankruptcy itself, which would mean surrendering certain assets, though primary residences are handled differently in Ontario, and the situation was complicated. The key thing, she told me, was that my parents needed to stop accumulating new debt. Any plan would fall apart if the gambling continued. I already knew that, but hearing it from someone official made it feel less like my opinion. I then did something that took me a week to decide on. I contacted a lawyer, a family law lawyer in Hamilton who a colleague had used, and asked about my own legal position. Specifically, was I at any risk if my parents continued to spiral? Were there any circumstances under which their debt could affect me? The answer was no, as long as I hadn't co-signed anything, which I hadn't. I had never co-signed anything in my life. I had always read what I was signing. Then I wrote 2 documents. One was a summary of everything my sister and I had found, every account, every amount, every discrepancy between what our parents had told us and what the paperwork showed. The other was a list of options, with the credit counseling information, the name of a licensed insolvency trustee in Cambridge, and a printout from the Ontario government website explaining consumer proposals. I put them in a manila envelope. I drove to Cambridge on a Saturday morning. My parents were home. My mother answered the door in her dressing gown, surprised to see me. I came in. I sat down at the kitchen table. My father came downstairs and sat across from me. He looked at the envelope in my hands, and something shifted in his face. A tightening, like he already knew. I said, "I'm not here to give you money. I'm here because I love you, and because I think you're in more trouble than you've told either of us." My mother started to say something. I held up my hand, gently. I said, "I know about the full amount. I know it's closer to 48,000, not 43. I know about both lines of credit. I know the gambling has been going on since at least 2018. My father's jaw moved. He didn't speak. I put the envelope on the table. "There's a summary inside," I said. "Everything my sister and I found. And there's information about real options. Not us covering this for you, but actual legal processes that exist for exactly this situation. A credit counselor, a licensed insolvency trustee. These are real people whose job is to help with this." My mother's eyes were wet. "We didn't want to burden you." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the restaurant on Stone Road, the laminated menus, the thing my father had said about my sister's 91 average. "You burden me," I said quietly. "Just differently." Nobody said anything for a while. My father picked up the envelope. He didn't open it, just held it in his hands. He looked older than I remembered. He looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was too tired to pretend he wasn't. He said, "We didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I told him. My sister drove up from Montreal 2 weeks later. Not because our parents asked her to, because she and I had talked about it and decided together that we wanted to be in the same room when our parents met with the insolvency trustee. Not to manage it for them, just to be there. The meeting was at an office on King Street in Cambridge. The trustee was a practical, no-nonsense woman who laid everything out in plain language. Consumer proposal was the most viable option given the equity in the house. It would mean my parents paying back a negotiated portion of the debt over 4 years, with the gambling treatment program factored into the narrative as evidence of good faith. The house would not be at risk if they stayed current on the proposal payments and the mortgage. My parents sat side by side and listened. My father asked questions I hadn't expected him to ask. Practical ones, about the monthly amount, about the impact on their credit score, about whether my mother's line of credit would be handled separately. He was paying attention. He was, for the first time in a long time, present. My sister and I sat in chairs against the wall. At one point, she reached over and squeezed my hand. It was a small thing. I hadn't expected it to mean as much as it did. Afterward, we went for coffee, just my sister and me, at a cafe near the office. She wrapped her hands around her mug and looked out the window at the November street. "I've been thinking about something," she said. I waited. "I don't think Mom and Dad ever meant to pit us against each other," she said. "I think they only knew one way to organize things. One person had to be the success story. One person had to validate everything they'd worked for. I think they needed that more than they needed us to be okay." I thought about that for a while. "Maybe," I said, "but needing something doesn't make it harmless." She nodded. She didn't disagree. We split the bill evenly because that's what we both wanted, without either of us saying so. We walked to our separate cars. She was driving back to Montreal. I was heading home to Hamilton. Before she got in her car, she turned and looked at me across the parking lot. "I'm sorry," she said, "for not calling sooner. For not knowing sooner." I had thought about what I would say to this, if it ever happened. I had imagined being cold, or gracious, or letting her off the hook completely. I had imagined saying something clean and resolved. What I actually said was, "Me too." And I meant it, not for anything I'd done to her specifically, but for all the years I had written off the possibility of her, had kept her at the same distance. I kept our parents, had decided it wasn't worth the effort to find out who she actually was. She had turned out to be someone worth knowing. I had almost missed it. My parents filed their consumer proposal in February. They were approved in March. The monthly payments are manageable. I know the amount because my father told me unbidden, which is still strange to me, that openness. This new habit he seems to be developing of saying things out loud instead of carrying them quietly until they collapse. He goes to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting every Thursday evening at a community center in Cambridge. He told me this on the phone last month, just mentioned it in passing at the end of a conversation about something else. Like it was a normal thing to share, which I suppose it is for people who share things. I still track every dollar I spend. I still update my spreadsheet every Sunday night. I still have revenue who has grown very fat and very opinionated and who treats my savings account statements with supreme indifference. I did not forgive my parents in a single moment. I do not think that is how it works. I think forgiveness, when it's real, is less like a door opening and more like ice thawing. It happens slowly, then it's just happened, and you look back at some point and realize it was a process, not a decision. What I know is this: I am 31 years old. I have built a life that is mine, made from choices I made, money I earned, mornings I got up before I wanted to. Nobody gave me any of it, and for a long time I thought that was just my loss, what I was owed and never received. But now I think there is something in it that I would not trade, something about knowing, completely, that I can take care of myself. My sister texts me on Sundays now, usually something small. A photo of something she saw on her walk, a question about a TV show. Last week, she sent me a meme about spreadsheets that was, honestly, not that funny, but I laughed anyway. I saved it. I think about the spreadsheet a lot. Not the one with my parents' debts, the older one, the one I started in second year university, where I tracked every dollar I spent because I had no one to catch me if I fell. I built that spreadsheet out of necessity, out of fear really, but somewhere along the way it became something else. It became proof. Proof that I could do it. Proof that being overlooked hadn't made me less. It had just made me careful, and then it had made me capable. What happened to my parents was the result of choices that compounded quietly over years. My father didn't lose $48,000 in a single night. He lost it slowly, in increments small enough to justify each time, until the total became something that couldn't be ignored anymore. That's how most damage works, I think. Not in dramatic collapses, but in small decisions repeated until the consequences arrive all at once and feel sudden even though they weren't. And what happened between my sister and me? What grew, slowly, in the parking lot of a Cambridge office building on a cold November afternoon? That was also compounding. Just in the other direction, I used to think integrity was about the big moments. The dramatic stands, the refusals, the lines you draw loudly in front of people who are watching. But I don't think that anymore. I think it's mostly about the small ones. It's about updating the spreadsheet even when no one will ever see it. It's about asking for the full picture before you hand over your savings. It's about calling your sister, actually calling, not texting, when you sense she deserves to know the truth, even though the conversation is going to be uncomfortable for both of you. My sister had been given every advantage I hadn't, and she had still ended up in a room with a licensed insolvency trustee, quietly reckoning with the fact that the people who loved her most had also used her. That's the thing about being the favorite. It doesn't protect you from being manipulated. It just means the manipulation is wrapped in something warmer. What I've come to believe is that the real work of a life, the work that actually holds, comes from three things that nobody can hand you. The first is choosing to act with honesty, even when it costs you something, even when the easier thing would be to look away or soften the truth into something more comfortable. The second is doing the hard thinking, building the spreadsheet, making the call, reading what you're signing, instead of hoping someone else will sort it out. And the third is simply not quitting, getting up before you want to, paying the loan, going to the meeting, driving to Cambridge on a Saturday morning when part of you would rather never see that kitchen table again. I didn't get those things from my parents. I'm not sure where I got them exactly, from necessity, maybe, or from some stubborn part of myself that refused to take being overlooked as final evidence of my worth. But I have them, and they're mine in a way that nothing given to me could ever be. My sister texts me on Sundays now. Last week, she sent a meme about spreadsheets that was genuinely not funny. I laughed for about 30 seconds. I think we're gonna be okay.